Marhaba, and welcome to the Matrix Green Pill, where real people connect.
Hello and welcome back to the Matrix Green Pill podcast. I'm Hilmarie Hutchison, CEO of Matrix Public Relations, and today I'm back again with my co-host, Shireen. Hello, Shireen.
Hello, Hilmarie. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for asking. So, Shireen, who are we joined by today?
So today we are joined by the brilliant Mimi Nicklin. Mimi is an international best-selling author and the host of the Empathy for Breakfast YouTube show, as well as the Secrets of the Gap podcast. She's an experienced marketer and communications specialist, a well-known empathetic leader, and a contributor and content creator for the global movement to balance humanism and capitalism.
Wow, I am so thrilled to be speaking with Mimi today. She has recently launched her very first book called Softening the Edge that focuses on making the workplace a more empathetic, valuable, and sustainably healthy place to be. Mimi, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
You are so welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. So let's jump right into it. Mimi, you are definitely a well-known person in the industry of empathy and mental health. But for those who might not have heard of you, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to in the last couple of years?
Yes, for sure. So as you ladies quite rightly said, I'm an author. I've just written my first book called Softening the Edge, which is a book all about the empathy deficit in the world and how we can imbue more empathy into predominantly into our workplaces and leadership, but of course into our society and our lives as well. I've spent the majority of my career working in advertising. I've done that all over the world and have spent really the last 12 or 13 years really studying culture from Singapore, Hong Kong, across South Africa, now in Dubai, and really looking at what it is as human beings, what it is that connects us, and really sort of understanding that we're all far more alike than we are different. And that's really what's prompted me to spend a lot of time now working in and talking about empathy.
Wow. Okay. How did you decide to get into empathy and mental health?
I think it's something that I've always been extremely passionate about. I've always been a very sort of people-focused person, as it were. I've always been drawn to work in collectivist societies, places like Asia and Africa, where human beings are very sort of connected and cohesive.
Right.
What prompted me to write this book specifically about empathy was a couple of things, but one of them was I wanted to write about the turnaround story that I had led here in Dubai, in the region. I came here in 2018 and was part of a team turning around a business. And I did that very much with a people-centric approach, with an empathy-first approach. And I wanted to really prove to the world that it can be done, that we can grow our businesses and our profit by empathizing with people above all else. And that really prompted me to start the conversation back in the end of 2019, and it's been growing ever since.
Fantastic.
Wow.
So you talk a lot about the well-being and empathy. So what does it mean when we talk about empathy in the workplace?
Empathy at its core is about perspective taking. So it's about being able to see the context, the reality, the needs of someone else from their mindset, from their perspective. And in a corporate environment, we're really talking about using empathy as a data set, as an ability to understand the people that are working for you and with you, and how you can, as a leader, lead with people at the core.
Yes, very good. So as you've mentioned, empathy has the power to change business and environments and to even change society for the better. So what are fundamentals for businesses to implement in order for this to be successful?
The core of empathy really comes from listening. So I always say that listening is the backbone to empathy, really. And as a leader or as a leadership team that's responsible for building culture, because of course, culture is built at the top of organizations, imbuing a culture of listening, of really hearing people, of asking for opinion, of being curious, of really inquiring about the stories and the values of other people is probably
attention.
paying attention, exactly, paying attention, and being interested, inquiring for information and then actually listening to what people give you, rather than, lots of us, especially in the business world, we ask questions in order to form a reply, in order to sort of move on with the conversation, versus actually listening and really looking for insight. So yes, listening and creating a culture of listening where every opinion is valued is at the core, really.
Fantastic.
Wow. Yeah. So Mimi, do you think that empathy in business has improved since you first noticed the gap?
I think, look, we've seen 30 years of declining empathy all around the world. And indeed, the empathy deficit was a term that President Obama coined back in 2006, so 15 or so years ago. So no, I think, the answer is empathy is still on the decline. The gap is still greatening and largening. But I do think that out of all of the turmoil that 2020 has brought us, there are some positives. And one of them is that there is now an elevated understanding of that gap and of the need for more empathy. So I do think people, leaders, organizations are beginning to recognize the gap and want to do something about it. But I don't think we're yet at the point where that gap is getting smaller.
Okay. So you're talking about leaders, like you just mentioned, but from your experience with speaking with leaders, do you think that they truly understand the message of empathy that you're trying to convey? Or is there like a big gap where they just can't really wrap their heads around what it means?
I think the answer is really, really mixture. And I think there are definitely many leaders out there that do understand. That want to understand and are acting on that and are keen to learn and train and share. But there are also many leaders who are very far away from this reality, perhaps due to their training, perhaps due to the cultural context that they live and work within, perhaps just due to lack of awareness. I mean, certainly some of the more old-fashioned ways and approaches to business is that, sort of you go to work to make money and go home, and there's no real interest in the humanity behind that, as it were. So yeah, there's lots of different answers to that, but certainly there's a raising awareness of the number of leaders that do understand what empathy in the workforce means.
Right. So you mentioned that you've lived in various cities, like I don't know if you've lived in London and Hong Kong, Singapore, Cape Town, Johannesburg, and Dubai. So would you say that in some cities there's a bigger empathy gap than in others?
Yes, I think there probably is. I don't have any data to back this up, and I think it would be a fantastic study to be involved in. But one can definitely, acknowledge that in the cities and the societies that are most developed, the ones that are really fast moving, so you're looking at London, New York, the big established, predominantly Western world cities, I think we do see far higher levels of individualism, far higher levels of loneliness, far higher levels of sort of urbanization. And when those factors go up, we do see empathy decline, because empathy is something that comes with connectivity, with collectivism, with those types of things. So yes, as I said, I don't have the data, but I would hasten to guess that the largest empathy gaps are in those really large metropolitan sort of business-led cities, where we're seeing the most distance between our people.
Yes. And if we had to compare region-wise, the MENA region, let's say, versus the Western world, would you say that there is also a marked difference or marked gap between how they approach empathy?
I think it would depend on which area of sort of society and life we're talking about. I think from a business corporate point of view, those sort of European markets are probably slightly ahead of the MENA region in terms of really recognizing the need for emotional intelligence in the workplace, the recognition of mental health and wellness in the workplace. There's a slightly higher level of sophistication in those markets, which have perhaps had access to data and understanding around these things for a little longer. From a social point of view, I would say that probably parts of the Arab world are more closely connected to empathy than perhaps in Europe, where we do see, again, much more collectivist societies, large family gatherings, large numbers of families that stay in areas that they grew up in, and tend to have far deeper connectivity to where they grew up and who they grew up with. Right. Which in many of those European markets we don't see, because often we see families sort of fragmented all over the world. So I think it depends on which area we're looking at, but certainly there are differences in different geographies.
Sure. So what tips would you give to leaders in the MENA region who have yet to implement or understand the importance of empathy in the workplace?
I think that the beginning to any real discussion is around awareness. And the tips I would give is probably to start looking into the data, of which there's a lot, that shows that high empathy environments, organizations that value emotional intelligence in their people, see higher performance indicators. So we see performance go up, we see output go up, we see morale and motivation go up, we see loyalty go up. So the reality is that high empathy environments make us money as well as making us happy. So I think awareness is key, training is key, teaching our people how to use empathy, how to listen, is incredibly important. It's something we don't do in any areas of our lives. We don't teach our children in school how to listen, and we certainly don't teach our teams in the workplace how to work with each other, how to really get the best out of each other. So some training and education in that area could also be highly valuable.
Very good. Some excellent insights there. So just to change the focus a bit, let's talk about self-empathy. What exactly does that mean, and how can we or practice self-empathy?
Self-empathy is kind of what it, does what it says on the tin, as it were. It's about understanding yourself better. It's about really being connected with how you feel in your environment, the things that motivate and drive you, what makes you comfortable versus uncomfortable, really being connected to how you feel, to where your limits are, to your emotional health and well-being. What we know is that people that practice high levels of self-empathy also see lots of benefits of that. So we see emotional health go up. So depression and anxiety is lower in people with high self-empathy. We see areas such as risk-taking and innovation go up, meaning it's an incredibly valuable facet for entrepreneurs or leaders in organizations. So practicing it is really about connecting with yourself, understanding yourself, taking time to do that. I mean, empathy as a whole has two great enemies. One of them is time and the other is stress. So really self-empathy thrives when you are managing your life in a way that is optimizing, that is looking after both your stress levels and the amount of time that you give to yourself to really focus on yourself and the position you're in.
Fantastic. And those are two things that impact so many different facets of our life. So let's say we're in a work situation where there is little or no empathy. Can we as individuals change or impact the level of empathy in our workspace?
What we can do, Hilmarie, is use our own empathy to encourage more empathy in those around us. So given empathy is something that we're born with, it's built into our prefrontal cortex in our brain, this is a skill that we all have. Where the rubber hits the road is in the choice to use it. So you choose to empathize or not. What we know about empathy is it's relatively contagious, and that's on a subconscious level. So what you'll find is the more you empathize with people, the more they empathize with you.
Right.
So I think what is within our power as individuals at any level of an organization is to use your own empathy to encourage that in others, to form better relationships, to build more trust in those around you, and create more connectivity, camaraderie, cohesion in the people you're working with. Where it becomes challenging is, of course, to try and impact your organization on a greater scale, because as I mentioned earlier, culture is always built from the top. And if you're in an organization that doesn't value that systematically, then it can become quite challenging to try and infiltrate that from other levels in the organization.
Right. So within our own circles, we can lead by example.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now let's talk about something that obviously can't be ignored, COVID. And how has that affected you personally?
You know what, Sharon, in many ways, it's a very double-edged sword, really. I've spent the COVID period, the lockdown period in the Middle East with my daughter. And on a personal level, that's been extremely challenging in many ways. Not least was that I had to publish a book in that time. That became very challenging to publish a book in the middle of a pandemic, not just from a functional point of view, publishers, distributors, sales, all of those types of really functional things that are challenging in the middle of a pandemic, but also emotionally. I had to try and finish my final edit on lockdown in a house with a toddler. There was some really challenging moments. But on a greater sort of picture here, as I mentioned earlier, what the pandemic has done is elevated the understanding and need for empathy in the world. So I had no dream that my breakfast show would reach 85,000 people in what's been about 5 years.
Amazing.
I just would never have imagined. I know, it's crazy. And my book became a bestseller before it went to the shops. I mean, it's been phenomenal because the environment has meant that suddenly humanity has a greater need than themselves to focus on. So yeah, that's why I say it's been a double edge. I wouldn't say it's been an easy year, but it's certainly been a positive year for those of us that are really passionate about trying to sort of awaken a new awareness of what we could be doing to sort of build on our society.
Right. Well, I do want to say congratulations on your success with your book. That is excellent.
Fantastic.
Talking more on what you just mentioned about how, there's more people talking about empathy right now due to COVID. So what you're saying is that it's been increased, like people are talking more about it now because of COVID, because of what they're going through?
Yeah, I think, there's just an elevated awareness from many angles. When I got the publishing deal for my book, which was around about a year ago actually now, so last November 2019, I remember calling my mother and saying, Mum, someone's going to publish my book. And she said, darling, that's wonderful, but who wants to read a book about empathy? Thanks, Mum. Great support. But she was right. And that was only a year ago. Nobody was talking about empathy. It wasn't a word in the media. You never saw it in a newspaper or on a podcast or in a leadership session. It just wasn't something that the world was talking about. And we're only talking about actually less than 12 months ago.
Yeah, so much has changed.
So much has changed, absolutely, Hilmarie, from a psyche point of view, an awareness point of view, the things that people need from their organizations, how they view work, how they view family. People's values have changed in this time. So yes, it's really on all kinds of areas. I mean, I think it's worth mentioning that, of course, the media has a massive role to play in that. And every day you'll find a little bit more media out there around empathy. And of course, the US elections, which none of us can ignore the fact that the US elections have a huge impact on the whole world.
Absolutely.
And Joe Biden, who is, rallying for his presidential position, his entire campaign is built on empathy. So from the moment Michelle Obama stood up probably about 5 weeks ago now, and really mentioned that she believed the current government team lacked empathy, the entire conversation has gone up another notch, and those political discussions are leading in the empathy debate as well. So there's a couple of areas why it's been driven upwards, but it's certainly on a very fast trajectory to being kind of word of the year, I'd say.
Yeah, it's definitely moved up the importance scale, I'd say. Like you said, it wasn't something that was really talked about, and now it's something that you can't ignore. It has to be mentioned.
So it was a great timing for you to be positioned where you were for this period. So staying on the topic of COVID, what has been one of the most important lessons you have personally learned this past year?
Oh, that's such a good question. I definitely think I've learned a lot about resilience. Personally, I still think today that I don't quite know how I do it. If I sit back and look at what has been achieved this year in the space of empathy, and my role within that, it's quite overwhelming even for me now. And I think that resilience has been a key part of that, which, by the way, is integrally linked to self-empathy. So if you don't have self-empathy, it's very difficult to find resilience because they are inextricably linked. So right. I think that my understanding of what I want to do with my life, what my purpose is, what my passion is, and my resilience against all the forces that have been around me to carry on, to get this book published, come hell or high water, as the British say, has been definitely a lesson in resilience. So I've learned really what I may be capable of, and hopefully I'll learn much more. I will learn much more of that in the future as well.
Sure, it's when we have challenging times that we realize that we're stronger than we imagined,
and we discover more about ourselves, I think, because we have more time to ourselves during that difficult time. Now let's change direction just a little bit, Mimi. Earlier this year, you started an excellent podcast. And for those who haven't heard of it, it's called Secrets of the Gap, which I thought was a really clever name. Could you tell us why did you decide to start it?
Yes, I wanted to have a platform that allowed me to talk to other people that believed in empathy, or potentially in the future don't believe in empathy, because, you know, always up for a good debate. If anyone out there wants to talk to me about not believing in empathy, that's also an interesting discussion to have. But yeah, I wanted to have a platform to really open the conversation around empathy in all different areas. So I speak to teachers, leaders, specialists, coaches, all kinds of different people. And we don't only talk about empathy, and I certainly don't just sort of, you know, push the word in there for no reason. But really, these are discussions around humanity, connectivity, cohesion, understanding. How do we understand each other? Why is that important? From all different kinds of specialists out there who have an opinion and have value to share. So yeah, really, I just wanted to create a platform for those conversations so that other people could, you know, learn, be inspired, or perhaps just prompt some questions out there in the world.
Right. Yeah, of course. And it's very important to have a platform, especially in an area that, you know, lacks conversation. So what do you hope to achieve with the podcast? What are the future goals you have for it?
Really, I hope that it just, you know, I think I mentioned it just now, but I hope that it can inspire people to think about empathy a little bit more and think about our shared humanity and think about connectivity between us and how important that is. As
Right.
someone who's worked in marketing forever, marketing and advertising, what I know is that in order to change behavior, you first have to drive awareness. That is a reality of all things in the world.
Absolutely.
And it's just not sustainable, ladies, for people to be taking antidepressants in order to go to work. You know, there
has to be a better solution.
There has to be a better solution. It's not sustainable nor acceptable that the second biggest killer of our youth is suicide. Okay, these are areas, you know, burnout, anxiety, depression, 340 million people with depression. These are societal areas. We can't just sit back and accept as, you know, modern day living. No, it can't be that way. So, you know, when you say what's the objective of the podcast, I hope it just drives some awareness and perhaps leads some people to question a little bit more how we can be working together better, how we can be connecting and looking after each other a little bit better, both at work and in life.
Fantastic. So to follow up on that, at about the same time, you also started a YouTube channel called Empathy for Breakfast. Again, love the name. So how is that different from the podcast and the book?
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey, actually. I really believe that you have to have the right content for the right platform. So the podcast is a conversation. It's an audio conversation between, you know, two people, between me and whoever I'm interviewing. The YouTube channel is much more of a monologue, although recently I have had some special guests on there. And the insight behind Empathy for Breakfast is that one of our greatest tools in driving empathy up is reading. There's plenty of research that shows us that when you read, we see empathy in the brain. The sort of neural activity around empathy in the brain changes when people read, because they can, you know, step into the lives of others. And so the backbone for what Empathy for Breakfast is that I read aloud to people live, from books, poetry, articles, academia, whatever is relevant to that week's theme, because nobody reads to anybody anymore. I mean, hopefully lots of your listeners read to their children, but as adults, I mean, can you remember the last time somebody read something to you? Probably not.
No. Yeah.
No, exactly. So that's the backbone of the show, really. It's 17 minutes long, really easy to fit in over a cup of coffee on a Tuesday morning, which is when it is. I introduce a new theme every week. I read live, and then I leave the viewers with some thoughts about what we might take away from that reading for the week ahead. So it's quite a unique format, I think. And yeah, I've had some really good feedback. I think people like to be read to, and we just don't do it enough.
Fantastic. So let's just go back to that point on the 17-minute rule. As you mentioned that in your introduction to your season 2. So Why exactly, tell our listeners, why exactly are your episodes 17 minutes long?
You know, Hilmarie, I'd like to say it's science, but it's definitely not. In my highly strategic opinion, 17 minutes is how long it takes to drink a cup of tea or coffee in a sort of a normal, relaxed state.
Right.
So if we're not, you know, rushing between school runs and meetings and whatever, just about 20 minutes is about the time that it takes us to really enjoy a cup of tea. So that was the reason I chose 17 minutes, but also all of my content, my podcast as well, everything I do is under 20 minutes. And the insight there is to try and be empathetic to the listeners. And I don't know about you two ladies, but I find it very hard to find time to fit in learning and listening to other people into my day, especially as a single mum. It's incredibly difficult. So I wanted all my content to be really empathetic to the busy lives that we're leading, and make really short content that people could sort of tune into and tune out of, you know, in a walk to the supermarket or whatever they're busy doing.
Yeah, I like that a lot, actually, because it's like you said, you know, we all have a lot of things to do, and of course, as parents as well. So it's great to just have something short but sweet and educational.
I was also going to say, now, when you look at all the things you've done this year, you can say, wow, you certainly have accomplished a great deal in 2020. Amazing. You did mention that you were willing to talk to anyone who is not on the same page as you about empathy. So have you dealt with any negativity where people have simply not understood the importance of your message or weren't taking you seriously?
You know, not yet. I'm waiting for that day, and
Good
you know,
answer. Not yet.
Not yet. Not with, you know, I'm not waiting with any enthusiasm. But I'm waiting because I'm sure there are many out there that don't share this belief and don't have time or interest or anything else to follow in this conversation. I always say to people, I'm not going to try and change people's minds. You know, I don't see that as my role in the world, to try and convince anybody of anything. I really see what I'm doing, as I said, about driving awareness and giving people data, insight, information, research that shows why I believe in what I'm doing. And of course, people that want to follow that journey and get on board are more than welcome. But as you said, if there's people that don't agree and want to have a conversation, I would love that too, because you know, the core of empathy is understanding others, and for sure I'm always going to be very interested in why people disagree might disagree.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, Mimi, that you were in quarantine with your daughter. So you know, to change gear a little bit, what are some of the empathetic things that you have been teaching your daughter and would like to encourage other parents to teach their children from an early age?
That's a brilliant question, Sharon. My little girl is 3, so she's very small. I think reading, as I've mentioned earlier, is incredibly important. Allowing them to understand the stories of others through storytelling is probably our most powerful tool as parents. The other thing that is really important is that we role model for them, because as many parents or even families with children in the family will know, they look up to us and they copy us. You know, they are looking to us to learn how to behave in society and behave with other people. So role modeling empathy is probably our second or equally greatest tool as parents, which is to show our children how important it is to understand others, to listen to others, to see others, to hear them. In terms of lessons, I mean, those are things that I teach her. You know, I teach her to inquire, to be curious, to wonder why. You know, if she says, well, Mummy, that person did this and now they're crying, I'll ask her to think about why. Why might they be crying? Why did that upset them? How might they be feeling? And one of the things that children, especially small children, can't get their head around is that someone is experiencing the same situation as them differently. So if they're enjoying the swings, they assume that everybody is enjoying the swings. So that ability for them to start understanding that other people share their space but don't feel the same as them is a really important lesson.
Oh, some lovely lessons. Very, very nice. So I'd love to know, Mimi, what are some of your future plans? Have you considered or are you planning to write any more books?
I am. I've just started actually my second book.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
May
I've
we
just started.
ask?
Yeah, so my second book's all about curiosity. So it's still about empathy. I'll always focus and specialize in empathy, but the second book is more about curiosity as the path to empathy, really. I mean, one of the things I've really learned this year is how important curiosity is. As I mentioned earlier, this whole understanding that inquiry is what drives us to be able to understand each other. So I'm going to be looking at the world, people from around the world, and really sort of helping to understand how different cultures and different types of societies use curiosity and empathy differently in order to connect. And I think there's lots of lessons to be learned out of some of the less developed world countries and how they are connecting as people and what we can learn from them. So yeah, there's lots of exciting things coming. A new book.
Exciting. Very
Yes,
good.
can't wait.
Yeah, so lots going on.
Great. Okay. So on that note, we have come to the segment of our show where we will each ask you a couple of rapid fire questions. So it's just like a little fun game show we like to play. So just first thing that pops into your mind. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Hardcover book or Kindle?
Hardcover book.
Tea or coffee?
Tea, for sure.
Of course, you're British.
I knew it. I told Hilmarie. I was like, she's British. It's going to be tea.
Yeah,
so you've lived in many cities, but I've chosen Singapore or Dubai.
Oh, Singapore.
Oh, okay. That surprised me. Your favorite song?
Oh, gosh. I don't know what my favorite song is. Can I come back to that one? I literally can't think of a single song. You know, when your mind goes blank, I will give you a song, but I need to think of one.
That's fine.
Sure.
No problem. So when you can come back to that at the end. Before we wrap up, we'd like to do our green pill moment. So could you please share with us an inspiring or life-changing experience that you've gone through, your green pill moment?
I think for sure, arriving here into this role has been incredibly life-changing for me. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, taking over this company, embarking on a turnaround, a real sort of deep turnaround of this business over 3 years in this region, as someone that wasn't from this region, and really being able to put to the test this idea of sort of human-centered, empathetically led organizational change, changed everything. I mean, it's been some of the hardest times of my life, without a doubt, particularly the summer of 2018. But when I look now where we are at the end of 2020 and all of the lessons I've learned and how that's become a book and a podcast and a show and all of these things, I think moving to Dubai was probably that moment, that exact moment that put me through real sort of turmoil in order to come out with a new purpose in life.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. It was so lovely to hear all your thoughts on empathy and how the world is changing and how it should change around empathy. I'm sure our audience is really going to enjoy this conversation as much as we have.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm so thrilled to have had this conversation and to have met you both. And I've thought of a song, so I'm going to say Lady in Red by Krista Berg.
Oh, very nice.
It's actually my mother's favorite song. And me and my sister grew up with it because it was her favorite song. And I mean, if I hear
your favorite song too.
Yeah, I mean, if I hear that anywhere in a mall or a restaurant, you know, I'm right back there with my mum and my dad and my sister. So yeah, that's my song for today.
Some lovely memories. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for playing along with our game show. I forgot to say that.
Yes, thank you.
I enjoyed that. You know who else does that is Brené Brown. Brené Brown does those quickfire questions at the end of her podcast.
Oh, okay.
It's always a lot of fun. So yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Very good.
I'm glad. Yes. Now, Mimi, just before we say goodbye, could you please share with our listeners where they can find and follow you online?
Absolutely. They can find me on Instagram at Mimi Nicklin, as well as on Facebook and LinkedIn. My podcast, Secrets of the Gap, is available across all podcast platforms, and my book is available on Amazon and at all leading bookstores. It's called Softening the Edge.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for being here with us. It was a pleasure.
It was
Absolutely.
so lovely. Thank you so much. We wish you all the very best, especially with a new book as well.
Thank you, you too. Lovely to meet you.
If you enjoy our conversations, please like and subscribe. See you next Wednesday.